Napoleon visiting the plague victims' hospital in Jaffa. In December 1797, as France was preparing for military action against England, General Napoleon Bonaparte proposed an expedition to Egypt to disrupt British interest and weaken the Ottoman Empire. The Eastern Army commenced its mission in May 1798, achieving initial victories in Malta, Alexandria, and Cairo. However, these successes were overshadowed by serious challenges, including a decline in morale and a shortage of supplies. The situation worsened when Admiral Horatio Nelson defeated the French fleet in Aboukir Bay, confining Bonaparte's forces. An unsuccessful attempt to advance into Syria was repelled, prompting Bonaparte to distort his reports back to France. On August 18, 1799, after news of his earlier victory was released, he secretly left Egypt and facilitated a coup that would change the course of French history. The events in Jaffa marked a dark chapter in Bonaparte's leadership narrative. He ordered the execution of 2,500 to 3,000 prisoners despite assurances of their safety from his officers. Simultaneously, a devastating outbreak of bubonic plague ravaged the French army, claiming nearly 30 lives daily and undermining the soldiers' morale. In a highly controversial directive during his retreat from Acre, he instructed his chief medical officer to poison 50 plague victims to avoid the risk of their capture. Although he faced resistance from the army's physician, a pharmacist eventually administered the lethal substance, and 7 survivors recounted the harrowing experiences of this event. In such circumstances, Napoleon's policy turned to exploit the crisis and the plague epidemic to address political challenges. He commissioned his contemporary artist Antoine-Jean to create a painting that would allow him to present himself as a holy savior and a symbolic figure of Christ the healer, stirring public sentiments that were engulfed in fear and terror amid the plague's death toll. This strategic maneuver enabled him to portray himself as a heroic figure, amidst the suffering and despair that enveloped society. In this context, Gros created the artwork titled, Napoleon Visiting the Plague Victims' Hospital in Jaffa. He skillfully employed chiaroscuro to create a striking interplay of light and shadow, highlighting the emotional weight of the scene. At the center of the painting, Napoleon is depicted visiting a field hospital, as if a celestial light illuminates him, revealing an aura of compassion and authority. This illumination not only emphasizes Napoleon's role as a leader, but also elevates him to a quasi-divine status, reminiscent of a healer who brings solace to the terrified patients amid the flood of plague victims with his calmness and sanctity. What Gros aimed to achieve was to create a scene that could elevate Bonaparte's actions to mythic dimensions. Thus, in a deadly and mournful atmosphere of pain and suffering caused by the epidemic, Napoleon is portrayed in a brilliant environment that starkly contrasts with the harsh realities faced by the plague-stricken patients around him. The creation of such a scene not only aligns with the portrayal of Napoleon as a healer but also reflects broader ideals of kings, during a time when they sought to establish themselves as benevolent rulers. Therefore, through this artistic representation and self-aggrandizement, Napoleon sought to reshape his leadership narrative amidst the chaos wrought by war and epidemic diseases. Thus, Gros creates a horrifying image of the ruthless effects of the plague, making the terrifying historical reality tangible for future generations. The anguished faces of the patients serve as a reminder of the brutality of the plague, a scene where the outbreak of bubonic plague, as a devastating pandemic, reflects traces of fear and death throughout the canvas. Victims succumb to high fever, painful chills, swollen lymph nodes, and debilitating fatigue, often leading to a grim fate within just a few days of infection. In fact, by creating a chilling portrayal of the merciless effects and toll of the plague, marked by the complete destruction of families and the abandonment of patients to suffer in isolation, Gros makes this horrifying historical reality palpable for posterity. The pervasive fear not only reveals the fragility of life but also underscores the despair regarding leadership that could have offered solace and hope amid the chaos. However, Gros transforms this moment of despair into a narrative of hope and resilience. The stark contrast of Napoleon's commanding presence against the backdrop of suffering highlights the ambitious tendencies of rulers who sought to present themselves as benevolent figures during times of crisis.